2 weeks into a new year and everybody's already angry. There's trouble ahead in Taiwan. Ukraine grinds on. In the Red Sea, in Gaza, in Israel, it's war. Whatever happened to peace and goodwill to all men? The Houthis, bombed by America and Britain, respond defiantly. Is that all you've got? China's bosses are furious with Taiwan's voters. How dare they elect a troublemaker? Post office chiefs accused of a tax fiddle protest. We're innocent. In the court of public opinion, though, the verdict's in. Guilty. On the show this morning, the former Prime Minister back batting for the government. Lord Cameron will update us on the UK's military action in Yemen and whether this is just the start of a much broader escalation. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting wants to give the NHS a shot in the arm. But are his latest grand ideas putting the country on course for a nanny state? Labour says it's up for that fight. The former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, will be here to tell me what, in his view, poses the greatest threat to the UK. Houthis, Hamas, or Donald Trump? And it's the TV drama that's done what years of campaigning and news coverage could not, and galvanised Westminster to correct the terrible injustice of the Post Office scandal. Gwyneth Hughes wrote Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, and she'll join me. Plus, with us throughout the morning, the former head of Channel 4 News, Dorothy Byrne, former editor of The Sun, David Yelland, and the journalist and author, Melanie Phillips. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. My thanks to Wilfred Frost, who rocked this seat last Sunday. I'm quite relieved he's already got his own show, 10 a.m. every weekday, right here on Sky News. It's exactly 100 days since the horror of the Hamas attack on October the 7th. Over 1,200 died that day in southern Israel. Palestinian authorities claim that more than 23,000 have been killed in Gaza since. Now the conflict is spreading to the Red Sea, disrupting one of the world's most important trade routes. Closer to home, public fury against post office bosses shows no signs of abating. Let's see if we can, as always, cool things down enough to work out what's really going on behind the headlines. Our first guest this morning, I spoke earlier to the Foreign Secretary, David Cameron. Foreign Secretary, we understand the Americans have sent a private message to the Iranians. Were you aware of that, and do you know what it says?
Well, we sent a private message, in fact, a slightly more public message last week when I spoke to the Iranian foreign minister, and we're completely aligned with the Americans about what we say to the Iranians, and it is basically that they are supporting these proxies in the region, whether it's Hezbollah, Hamas, or the Houthis, and they have got to be absolutely clear with them that what is happening in the Red Sea is unacceptable. And we've demonstrated very clearly that we back our words, our warnings, with action when it is necessary.
I don't imagine he said, yes, Lord Cameron, I'll go and do that now. What was his response?
Well, it was, as you can imagine, with the British Foreign Secretary and an Iranian Foreign Minister, it was a spirited and lively exchange. But what I wanted to absolutely, getting onto this diplomacy thing, but no, what I wanted to be absolutely clear about was that what was happening was unacceptable. That military action should always be the last resort. But since the 19th of November, we have had 26 attacks on ships. Freedom of navigation really matters. It's not just the goods that are coming to this country, the dangers of our economy being dislocated. It's also, grain ships on their way to Ethiopia and Sudan to feed some of the poorest and hungriest people in the world. This really matters. Yeah. And what was happening was unacceptable.
You said this morning that the UK is ready for more strikes. Is this an open-ended commitment?
No, what I've said is that we have sent the clearest possible message to the Houthis that their behaviour is unacceptable. And we've demonstrated that we're prepared to follow words and warnings with action. And that is incredibly important that they understand that.
The leader of our NATO ally, Turkey, says that the action is disproportionate. Now, what are you going to do if you want to take further action and the Turks say, no, no, no?
Well, we don't agree with what President Erdogan has said. If you look at the action we've taken, it's actually backed by a very wide coalition of countries. There are obviously...
But he's our ally.
Yes, of course. He's an important NATO ally, but in this case, we don't agree. We see this as completely separate from the Israel-Gaza conflict. I mean, what is happening in the Red Sea? 26 attacks, and of course they were getting more severe. I mean, one of the final attacks, which was involving HMS Diamond, our own destroyer, there were over 20 drones and missiles attacking that ship. And so, it's unacceptable. We have to act. There's a very large number of allies that agree with that. And of course, it's not just Britain and America in the military chain, as it were. There's also the Dutch, the Canadians, the Australians, and others, the Bahrainis in that chain.
Is it really realistic to say this has nothing to do with Israel-Gaza? You might say the Houthis are playing games and so on, but shouldn't you really be focusing on achieving something that looks like a sustainable ceasefire there, which would mean the Houthis would have no reason to do what they're doing?
Well, we are doing that at the same time. In fact, we've been doing that from the get-go. So first of all, on the aid that needs to go into Gaza, this week I've taken a number of steps to talk to the Israelis about opening more crossings, about allowing aid into the Ashdod port in Israel. At the moment, we've got something like 150 trucks of aid going into Gaza every day. We need to get to something like more 500 trucks a day. So that is absolutely the focus of the British government, and also trying to get to a sustainable ceasefire.
But my point is, as long as that's going on, whatever you think about what the Houthis are saying, whether it's real or not, you're giving them legitimacy for saying that this is about Israel and Gaza.
Well, of course, they will say what they want to say. Actually, the Yemeni government doesn't agree with that. But you can turn it around the other way and say, well, what are the consequences of not acting? I mean, since the 19th of November, we've endured almost 2 months of continual attacks. And we gave warning after warning. And frankly, ultimately, that wasn't working. The number of attacks was going up. The severity of those attacks was going up. So, not acting is also a policy, and it was a policy that wasn't working, and that's why it's necessary to act.
All right,
But if you're asking me, do we also need to, bring peace to the situation in Gaza and get a sustainable ceasefire? Yes, absolutely. And do we need to get aid in? Yes, we do.
I want to come back to that, but let's just talk about the background to this. Your colleague Grant Shapps said, he was very direct. He told the Iranians, "We see you. We see through what you're doing." In your view, is the real enemy here Iran?
Well, there's no doubt that the malign actor in the region who is behind these proxy groups is Iran. Iran backs Hamas, they back Hezbollah, they back the Houthis, they provide them with weapons. They also back armed groups that are acting within Iraq and attacking British and American bases and troops. So we know what they're doing. We know what they're doing is wrong. We call them out for it, and we're very clear about that.
Has it occurred to you, or let me put it this way, have you considered the risk that this action, whatever it does out there, raises the likelihood of terrorist action here at home? Are you planning to raise the threat level?
Well, the threat level is set after careful consideration by the Joint Terrorism Assessment Centre, and that's the right way of doing it. It's not in the power of politicians just to suddenly wake up one morning and decide to change the threat level. But our view is, look, take a step back from this. I mean, it's hard to think of a time when there's been so much danger and insecurity and instability in the world. The lights are absolutely flashing red, as it were, on the global dashboard. And what we need at that time is strong leadership and a clear plan. That's what we have with the Prime Minister and the team in place.
But my point is,
taking action, if you don't act against the Houthis in the Red Sea, you're going to see more attacks. They are effectively terroristic attacks. You'll see more of that.
My point is that by your action, you're raising the risk or the danger to people in this country. Was that part of your consideration in making this decision?
We consider all of those things. I mean, obviously, it's interesting coming back as a former Prime Minister and sitting in those Cobra meetings and cabinet meetings and watching the Prime Minister. He is absolutely meticulous and careful at considering every question. Is there an alternative? Have we exhausted all the other possibilities? Is this the right action to take with our allies? What will be the reaction in the region? What are the effects back at home? I mean, it's incredibly impressive to watch someone with that attention to detail, with that care and caution, but also ultimately the strength to take what I believe is the right decision, which is to act. Of course, you can always say the Americans can do this on their own. But frankly, if you have the capability to help, and if you share with them the analysis that this needs to stop, it's right to step forward and act. And that's not Britain being sort of grandiloquent or anything. We are a country whose national interest is deeply affected by this.
Let's talk about the impact of your own experience sitting in that prime ministerial seat. Back in 2013, you sought the backing of the House of Commons for an attack on Syria, and you thought, you said in your memoirs, you had Ed Miliband's support, but in fact, Labour voted against you, you lost the vote, and as a consequence, the Americans dropped plans for military actions. Now, when he stood for elections Labour leader, Keir Starmer promised that he'd never support military action. He says he does this morning. Are you sure you can count on his backing?
Well, he's been clear. I was not in the briefing that he received, but I've heard what he said publicly, that he backs the action that's been taken, and I think it's right to do that. In terms of Parliament, there will be a statement in Parliament on Monday. There'll be opportunity for parliamentary colleagues in both houses to raise questions and to ask about this, and I think that's right. And what I would say about what the Prime Minister's done is he's followed every process correctly about bringing colleagues together, listening to military advice, taking legal advice, and then making a statement. So on this issue, should we have had a vote in advance? I don't think.
But I think what I'm really asking about is the effect of your own experience here. In your memoirs, you write that you were deeply affected by the West's failure in the Balkans and Rwanda, and that in Syria, the Western world hadn't done enough to back the good guys. And is there a sense here that you might be overcorrecting for past mistakes?
No, I don't. I absolutely don't think that. I think you have to look at each situation on its merits. I had occasions in office where, as you say, on Syria, we didn't go ahead with the action after the chemical weapons. I think that was a mistake, but nonetheless, there we are. We had occasions, for instance, in the campaign against ISIS and the ISIL state, effectively, in Iraq and Syria, where we did go ahead with others, and where that was very effective, and ISIL no longer has a state. So I think, you take each occasion on its merits, but crucially, there is a different Prime Minister in place, someone who looks at these things incredibly carefully. He doesn't come at it with any preconceived notions, but I could profoundly see someone who was making the right decision in the right way.
All right, a couple of quick questions about related but separate issues. This week you suggested to the parliamentary committee that Israel might be guilty of war crimes.
I didn't say that.
Well, OK, let me ask you this way then. Do you agree with the South Africans that Israel has a case to answer before the International Court of Justice?
No, I absolutely don't. I think the South African action is wrong. I think it's unhelpful. I think it shouldn't be happening. Now, of course, I'm not a lawyer, but they are talking here about genocide. They're taking this case on the basis of genocide. And, to prove that, you've got to prove that there was intent. Now, I take the view that Israel is acting in self-defense after the appalling attack on the 7th of October. But even if you take a different view to my view, to look at Israel, a democracy, a country with the rule of law, a country with armed forces that are committed to obeying the rule of law, to say that they have, that country, that leadership, that armed forces, that they have the intent to commit genocide, I think that is nonsense. I think that's wrong.
But you can't know that. You can only judge on the basis of what they've done.
Yeah, you can judge. You can judge, though, on the basis of what they have done and how they've acted and why they're acting. And to say there's an intent to commit genocide, I do believe that's wrong.
All right. Last night, new president in Taiwan, described by the Chinese Communist Party as a troublemaker. Do you think this brings a Chinese intervention in Taiwan any closer?
Well, first of all, we should congratulate the Taiwanese for carrying out another set of elections. They've got a vibrant and lively and effective democracy, and also congratulate the winner, the president. And in terms of what happens next, look, we, don't want to see any unilateral change in the arrangements across the Taiwan state. We don't believe in the use of force in any way in this situation. And we wish the new president well. All
right, look, let's talk about some domestic issues. Big moment this week, apparently. No small boat landings for a month, though they actually resumed yesterday. You are the first to say net immigration numbers should fall below 100,000. This year, irrespective of the small boats, the figure is over 500,000. I think that the young people now would call that an epic fail on the part
I think,
of your
first
government.
of all, we've got to separate the legal from the illegal. On the legal migration, we have had some quite big changes. Quite rightly, we've taken a lot of people from Ukraine. I actually hosted a family in my own at home. We've had, obviously, the Hong Kong Chinese with the British passport holders. They've come over, and also you've had all the effects of
way north of 100,000. Come on.
Well, of course it is, and the Prime Minister set out, and the Home Secretary set out very clear rules
for.
Well, they've set out very, very big and clear changes to bring down legal migration. I mean, crucially, what matters is it's a three-sided coin, this. You've got immigration policy, you've also got your education policy and your welfare policy. You've got to make sure you're training British people for the jobs that are being made available, and you've got to have a welfare policy that means that people out of work look at the chance of work. Now, the government's got all of those things in place.
I get all of that, but almost everything you've tried has resulted, rather than a drop, but an increase, hasn't it?
Well, you've seen big changes on the legal side. On the illegal side, I strongly support what the government's doing, and I see this all across the world. You know, wide-scale, very visible, illegal immigration is so destructive to trust in a country and a country's immigration system, and that's why, crucially, next week, the Rwanda bill will go ahead, and quite right too.
Another hangover from your time in charge is the persecution of post office sub-postmasters. Your Chancellor, George Osborne, said that he was completely unaware of what was taking place. Now, James Arbuthnot, who was then an MP, the MP who led the campaign on this, says he wrote to every member of Parliament, which would include you and Osborne. How could you not know what's going on?
Well, first of all...
How is that possible?
Well, the most important thing is there is a public inquiry underway, and that public inquiry can look at every piece of paper that is sent to every MP and every minister. So I think let's make sure that happens. But even before that, quite rightly, the Prime Minister acted very decisively last week with this new law that will be passed to pay the compensation.
You're dealing with the question I've asked you. How could you guys not know?
Well, all I can say is I don't recall in any detail being briefed and being aware of the scale of this issue. But that's what the public inquiry is for. They must look at all the advice ministers received and all the action that was taken.
I'll go further. It's about you.
Yes.
Is there no part of you that is saying to yourself now that you or Osborne or Ed Davey could have acted at some point to avert what is a scandal, but actually it's worse, a human tragedy?
I'd go further than that. I mean, first of all, this is an appalling miscarriage of justice. And anyone who's been involved in government in any way over the last 20 years has got to be extremely sorry, as I am, about what has happened and how these people have been treated.
So you feel some responsibility?
No, I think everyone in government has got, who's been involved. This goes back before my time in office, when these original things were signed. And we've got to get to the bottom of it. And that's what public inquiries do. They can look at what were ministers told, what information was put in front of them, what did they decide. And because it's hard to remember every letter and piece of paper put in front of you. I don't recall being briefed about any detail, but let's let this public inquiry do its work.
OK, I'm not asking you this as a technical question, but just as a parliamentarian, as a person. Do you feel the post office bosses who did know for certain should face criminal charges? Well,
if anyone has broken the law, they should face criminal charges. And we've got to get to the bottom of who is responsible for what and who should be accountable. And if it involves law-breaking, then we have an independent judicial system in this country. But if people have broken the law, they should face the consequences.
All right, last question for you really, in a way. You've always said that you entered politics because you'd been fortunate in your life and you felt some duty to serve. If your party said to you, David, we need you back in the House of Commons, we've got your seat, what would you go home and say to your wife, Sam?
That's not going to happen, so I don't have to. I have enough difficult conversations.
Well, of course, it's entirely possible. Alec Douglas-Hume came back as Foreign Secretary.
I was delighted to be asked by Rishi Sunak, someone I admire greatly. I believe in public service. This is a time where we've got huge amounts of uncertainty and danger and difficulty in the world, and the ability to come back and try and serve in some capacity as Foreign Secretary is a huge honour for me. I'm going to do my best, use the experience I've got, but there's no other agenda here.
But it's not about another agenda, it's about you and duty. Threat to your party is Nigel Farage, Reform Party, now polling above 10%, taking a huge bite out of your numbers. surely you would do anything in your power to stop the fruitcakes and loonies torpedoing the Conservative Party.
No, I'm doing the job I was asked to do. I'm delighted to do it. I'm not after any other role.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Well, we'll get some reaction to that into David Cameron in just a moment. But first, let me bring you some breaking news. 4 migrants have died while crossing the Channel. The French authorities described the tragedy as happening when a boat left the beach and people found themselves in difficulty at sea to reach the boat. They said 4 people died and a 5th was seriously injured while trying to reach the boat in freezing water. The accident happened near a beach in Wimereux. A tugboat, the Abbé Normandie, was on patrol in the area and launched its boat to rescue those people. The crew then identified inanimate and unconscious people in the water. Well, that's pretty dreadful news to start the day. Dorothy, this small boats issue will not go away now, will it?
No, and when you see that description of inanimate bodies in the water, it's absolutely tragic. And I think everybody in Britain accepts we need realistic policies to try to deal with this problem.
David, I talked to David Cameron about the plan, Rwanda plan, and all of that. This is baffling the government, and indeed probably the opposition as well, isn't it? I mean, they seem not able to find a way out through this problem.
That's true. The thing that I'm interested in is how our inability to look at this from the point of view of the people in the water. You know, we're going to talk later, I'm sure, about the post office situation. Everybody's saying, why couldn't we see that from the point of view of the postmistresses? And what fascinates me is we don't seem to look at these issues of our time from the point of view of those people on the boat. Maybe it'd take an ITV drama about that in a few years' time for us to do that, and we'll all say, well, how could we have sat here and not thought about it? I'm not defending the people smugglers. I'm just thinking what it must be like for those people, you know, those desperate people on those boats at the moment.
Do you think this will have any impact on policy, on debates going to take place this week, Melanie? Or, well, David, you first, and Melanie.
I don't think, sadly, no, I don't.
It'll bump it up the political agenda, it must do. We'll bring the issue to the fore of people's thinking processes again. So to that extent it will have that sort of effect. But the real problem is, as we've just been implying, that the government has come up with various strategies to deal with this problem, none of which is actually, in my view, going to work. And they are desperately trying to talk up the Rwanda plan, as we can see. But my own personal view has always been that is a highly unrealistic and really quite bizarre way of going about things. In my view, they won't grasp the nettle. The nettle being that what is driving this dreadful trade and causing these terrible tragedies is a pull factor that Britain exercises on the imagination of those who wish to leave their countries. And it's to address that pull factor that the government has to make better efforts. In my view, it won't do that because it touches on fundamental issues such as membership of the European Convention on Human Rights, the whole structure of welfare policy, which the government doesn't want to touch for various reasons.
Let's, if we may, go back, we may return to this when we get more news, but let's go back to what Mr. Cameron had to say. Of course, the issue until this moment of the day has been what's happening in Yemen. Does it bother you, Dorothy, that it seems like that everything is now possible? Cameron basically said, if we need to go back and do more strikes and so on, we will do that. Is this conflict spreading, do you think?
Well, it does concern me. He said that we had no choice but to do this. Well, many other countries didn't agree. And you feel that this is reminiscent of other times we were told we had no choice, that things could be controlled, that they knew what they were doing, and that's how we got involved in Iraq. That's how he got us involved in Libya. So I feel very concerned that we don't know where this is taking us.
You're spending a lot of time in the region now, Melanie, aren't you? How does it look to you?
Well, my view has been for the last 4 decades that for reasons which largely perplex me, Britain and America have failed to deal with the fact that Iran has been at self-declared war with the West for the entirety of its regime and has been carrying out attacks on Western interests throughout that time. My view of what's going on in the Middle East, including the Houthi assaults, is that Iran is clearly behind them. Iran uses the Houthis as it uses the Hamas and the Hezbollah as proxy actors to advance Iran's interests and power in the region. Iran's agenda is to hit the West, to hit America, and as the great Satan, the little Satan as Israel. Israel is in the eye of the storm at the moment because of the Hamas and the onslaught that has been launched. But it's been quite clear from what Hamas has said, from the activities of Iran, that Iran is using this as a means of increasing its power in the region and of doing harm to Western interests and indeed increasing the attack on the West. My view is that all these activities by America and Britain are dancing round the issue. They will not attack the head of the snake.
Which is, you say that in Tehran. We're going to talk to the former head of MI6 about all of that a little later. But Dave, do you buy that analysis?
I do, yes, and I'm also concerned about the lack of ability, for whatever reason, of the political class and indeed the public and the media to a degree to grasp these issues, because things come, things go. You know, this issue has been around for a very long time, but we don't seem to be able to. We seem to have lost the ability to focus on very big issues as a country. The news cycle now seems to move so fast. That thing. Everyone's saying, well, why didn't we focus on the post office thing, for example? And we can talk about that later. But we never get to a moment where we face into really difficult situations. So the Iranians know, because they study our media, they study what we say, that in a couple of days we'll have moved on to something else, and that's the problem.
Dorothy, I thought the Foreign Secretary. I won't make a judgment that he underplayed it, but he rather slid around the question of whether the action that's been taken in the last 48 hours increases the likelihood of a terrorist response here in the UK or in the United States and so on. Do you think that's an issue or not?
Oh, well, I think that must be a concern. The more immediate concern that many people will feel is that we are now being drawn into fighting the Houthis, who, yes, they may be armed by Iran, but they are deranged people in their own right too. And many people are now saying it's not some liberal left view, that they are a reckless group of people and that by attacking them, this is a gift to them. We have made them more important. And I don't think we needed to do this. I know it's a very difficult issue, but I'm not convinced that we've thought through enough what the consequences are going to be of this. And that's why it reminds me so much of what we were told about Iraq and what we were told about Libya, that this was some controllable event where we could perceive what the consequences were. And that turned out to be untrue then, and I feel worried about this.
I think there's a point, isn't it, that we often talk about these things as though all of these proxies are chess pieces that can be moved across the board by the Chinese or the Russians or the Iranians or whatever it is. But the Houthis they're a combination of individual bands to start with, but they have their own existence, don't they?
Oh, very much so. But nevertheless, I think one can't overestimate the extent to which this whole sequence of events in the Middle East has been caused by the perception, which is a correct perception, that America is no longer prepared to defend its interests. And if you have, the great superpower of the world, which is has been principally involved in defending the free world, basically saying, we're not interested anymore, then you've got bad actors who are going to say, whoopee, that's exactly what's happened. And it's all very well saying, that this is a very dangerous moment. Of course it's a very dangerous moment, and I think none of us should underestimate the capacity for further terrorism here or elsewhere. But the fact is, this is an insupportable situation. You cannot have commercial shipping being the routes for commercial shipping being attacked in this way, with the appalling consequences that follow for the world's economy. It's an impossible situation. It has to be dealt with. My problem, my issue is that the core of this problem should have been dealt with a long time ago to prevent this from happening, and it's even now not being addressed at source.
We had to talk to the Shadow Health Secretary in a moment, but Dave, before we leave Mr. Cameron's, Lord Cameron's interview, I beg your pardon, were you disappointed to hear him say that he wouldn't be back in the House of Commons?
Not really, no. If I'm really honest, I wasn't all that surprised. Although I have noticed over the years that the Conservative Party, as a party, never ever gives up. That's why they're so often in power, and usually are in power. They never give up as individuals or as a party. So, he'll be around, won't he?
Okay, so you're basically saying take his answer as an interim answer. Anything could happen. Jolly good. All right. It is just after 9 o'clock. You're watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, David Cameron has told this programme that Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea are completely unacceptable. The Foreign Secretary said that the UK has demonstrated with words and actions that it will defend the crucial trade route. And he said that escalating tensions in the region meant that the lights are flashing red on the global dashboard. Well, we've got a lot more for you this morning. We're going to hear more from our panel, Dorothy Byrne, David Yelland and Melanie Phillips, throughout the next hour. Now, Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting is here with me in a moment, and he's been out and about defending Labour's plans for the NHS and setting out what a Labour government would do differently. Former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, will tell me what poses the greatest threat to the UK, Houthis and instability in the Middle East, or perhaps Donald Trump. And later in the programme, we'll speak to the director and screenwriter who wrote the seminal ITV drama Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, which is changing government policy. Her name is Gwyneth Hughes. OK, I'm delighted to be joined by the man who wants to run the NHS. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting is in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Keir Starmer said this morning that he supports the American and British action in Yemen, and he was informed ahead of the strikes. But did he suggest, as far as you know, that there should have been a recall of the House of Commons and a vote on the matter?
No, I think we understand that in some cases, like this one, government has to act swiftly and decisively, and without reference to Parliament. Of course, it's always preferable, and successive Labour and Conservative governments have gone to Parliament for votes on military action. But I think in this case, it's an open and shut case. We've got the Houthis who've been threatening commercial shipping, and with it, Britain's economic interests, and subsequently has attacked HMS Diamond, one of our own vessels, with our service personnel on board. I think that absolutely necessitates a robust response. And as we already know, and we'll hear from the Prime Minister on Monday, these strikes were targeted and focused and absolutely necessary in Britain's self-defence and national interest.
You'll forgive me if I express some puzzlement, because Sir Keir, when he ran for election as Labour leader, promised, he said this, he'd never back military action abroad without a parliamentary vote. What's changed?
Well, I don't think for a moment that Keir was suggesting that where urgent and immediate action is necessary, the government should be able to take it.
He would never back military action abroad without a parliamentary vote. It doesn't matter. He didn't say urgent unless it's urgent. He just said he wouldn't.
No, I don't think that's ever what he would have envisaged at all. And I think any reasonable person would understand that there are times when governments have to act quickly and decisively. I mean, can you imagine if in a situation where our troops came under attack, our ships came under attack, our air force came under attack, They said, oh, hang on a minute, everyone, before we sort of take off or before we open fire, we better just get on the phone because we're going to have to recall Parliament, get MPs from around the country, have a nice debate and then a vote. Come on, no one would reasonably suggest
I just want to be clear where we are, okay, because that wasn't where we were
a few years
back.
If there is a Labour government and Keir Starmer is Prime Minister and Britain's interests are at threat and immediate action is necessary, military action is necessary, we will not hesitate to act.
All right, on Gaza, you rejected the idea of a ceasefire. The South Africans have gone to the International Court of Justice in pursuit of a ruling which would have that effect. David Cameron's told me this morning he thinks that's just wrong. Do you agree?
I think it's a distraction from what needs to happen, which is the diplomatic heavy lifting to bring about an end to this conflict. You know, respect the International Court of Justice. It's for them to make decisions and judgments in relation to South Africa's
But you don't think it's wrong for the South Africans really to raise this issue?
It's a matter for the South African government. They're perfectly entitled to. The ICJ needs to hear their application and weigh up the evidence. But I actually think the priority here has got to be trying to get to where we were actually some months ago now, which is a humanitarian pause in fighting and the diplomatic heavy lifting to bring about the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire, which is what we all want to see. And you look at the scale of the bloodshed, you look at the scale of destruction in Gaza, the number of civilian casualties, they are disproportionate and it's horrifying.
But I'm not quite getting what your view is. Cameron was clear. He said he just thinks this is a wrong way to approach this problem. It shouldn't be going through a court. This is a political question. I'm not quite clear whether you agree with that or not.
I'm very clear. Our focus, Labour's focus and Britain's focus should be on the diplomatic effort to bring about an end to hostilities between Israel and Hamas. It is not easy. Hamas continue to say they'll carry out similar atrocities. They continue to hold hostages. Israel continues to bombard Gaza, and we've also got to see that in the context of some pretty worrying things that have been said by leading Israeli government officials about the long term and where they see this all going.
Let's talk about some of the things that you want to talk about. You've been talking about this week. You put forward a proposal for schools to encourage children to brush their teeth. Very worthy, and there may be some families who need this kind of guidance and support. But is it really the government's business to teach basic hygiene to the nation?
I wish it wasn't. It really shouldn't be. But when you've got tooth decay being the number one cause of hospital admission amongst children aged between 6 and 10, and, you know, think about that for a moment, things so bad they're being admitted to hospital, that involves both a cost to the child and their health, but also a cost to the NHS, which I think is unbearable. And so if we know that there is a proven, tried and tested way of keeping kids' teeth clean and keeping them out of hospital, why wouldn't we take it? And that's why I put forward proposals for this scheme, which would benefit, around 1 in 5 children.
Why schools? Shouldn't parents and families be just doing this? Isn't this just a sort of devious way of saying you're not going to restore the collapsed NHS dental system?
No, quite the opposite. Quite the opposite, Trevor. I think it's two things. One is it will take time to rebuild NHS dentistry. It is in such a sorry state, and I just warn people, if you want to know what the future of the NHS looks like under the Tories, look at NHS dentistry, which has been reduced to a poor service for poor people, if there's a service there at all. What we've got to do is to rebuild that. We've put in place a plan that will provide 700,000 extra emergency dentistry appointments a year, but it will take time. Even when that's successful, we still got to focus, and this applies broadly across health, on prevention, not just treating sickness, but preventing ill health. That's good for the nation, good for the public finances.
But I'm asking you this in context of some of the other things you've been saying. You're worried that our children are getting shorter and fatter under the Tories, apparently. I want to ask you about priorities. When it comes to academic performance across the world, in 8 of the top 10 performing nations, people are shorter than or equal in height to Brits in Singapore, South Korea, China, Canada. They're all shorter, but they're brainier. Are you sure you've got your priorities right here? I mean, do we need to get into a whole tall, short thing when actually we should be teaching our children better?
Well, I hope the Conservatives haven't beaten hope out of this country to such an extent that we now think we have to choose between educated children and healthy children. We can
yeah,
do
but what
both.
you're saying is it
And
doesn't
that is
matter
why this week,
if we're thick, as long as we're tall, right?
Hang on a minute, hang on. This week we've had a whole week of Labour and policy announcements from Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, early in the week, talking about how we boost attendance, raise standards in schools, and towards the end of the week, myself and Keir Starmer focusing on children's health. These are all fully costed, fully funded plans. Let's not let any of these pundits get away any longer with saying Labour has no policies. You've had a whole week of policies.
For once, I'm not worried. I'm not bothering you about money, but this feels a bit like that you just enjoy telling everybody what to do. This is Labour bringing back nanny state, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's about Labour making sure we've got well-educated children and also healthy children as well. And broadly in health policy, we've got to, yes, get the NHS back on its feet and make sure it's there for us when we need it, free at the point of use, fit for the future.
Okay.
We've also got to focus on preventing ill health, and good public health measures can not just save lives but save public money, which is in short supply thanks to 14 years of Conservative favour.
One rather serious but little noticed announcement this week is that the Prime Minister's told civil servants that they can now talk to you as a prospective government and start briefing you and so on. Have you started to meet health officials yet? And if you, whether you have or not, what is the first thing you're going to ask them to work on?
So I haven't had those conversations yet. Hopefully they'll be starting shortly. We have a plan, 10-year plan for the reform and modernisation of the health service. And I want them to start working straight away on preparing for implementation. We want to hit the ground running on day one. And there are a whole bunch of things that we will be able to achieve over the long term for the future of health and social care. And that's why we've talked about the need for a decade of national renewal. But there are some things that could make immediate difference, like providing 2 million more appointments a year to cut NHS waiting lists, extra evening and weekend working. We can get cracking on that straight away. The 700,000 extra dentistry appointments, get cracking on that straight away. Recruiting the mental health workforce to reduce the rates of suicide and self-harm amongst children and young people. Got to get cracking on that, certainly, straight away.
OK, that's your list. No doubt we'll be talking about it more as time goes by. Wes Streeting, thank you very much indeed. We will be getting our panel's take on that interview very shortly. Plus, we'll hear from former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, and the writer between the hit post office drama that's horrified the nation, Gwyneth Hughes. But it's an exciting week here on Sky News. At this time tomorrow, breakfast has a new look.
Breakfast is becoming even brighter here on Sky News. There's a new studio, a new start time of 6 a.m. and some new faces.
OK, yes, we'll bring you all the top stories from around the globe.
And here in Westminster as we count down to an election.
Plus a look ahead to the stories that'll be making headlines on Sky News throughout the day.
That's your New Look breakfast show, weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. here on Sky News.
Do join us for all that tomorrow. But before that, let's hear from our panel once again. Dorothy Byrne, David Yelland and Melanie Phillips. David, Labour seems to be completely in lockstep with the government on this. And I think from the nation's point of view, people regard it as a good thing. But is it a problem for them in an election year not to differentiate?
On foreign policy?
Yeah.
On foreign policy, no. I think they have no option but to say what they're saying. Keir Starmer know, the front bench know that they've got the tabloid editors looking at them for any sense that they are weak on foreign policy. It's a tried and trusted way of attacking the Labour Party since the war. So, they're quite right to say what they're saying. It seems to me they have no choice, and that the job here is not to be the story.
Melanie, you've got a long history in covering social affairs and all of that. I'm very struck by as it were, the new Labour stance, toothbrushing and worrying about people being short and all of this. I was teasing Wes Streeting a bit about being the nanny state, but is that an Achilles heel for Labour, or is it actually just what people want?
I'm afraid my teeth grate when I hear people attack people over the nanny state. I mean, nannies are actually quite good people. And I think it is the duty of a responsible government to be aware of social problems and try to alleviate them. clearly they should not be interfering in people's personal lives and people's family lives more than is absolutely necessary. My concern about toothbrushing is not the nanny state. It's that it's like, what? You've got a health service which is collapsing, and they're talking about toothbrushing. You've got children whose mental health is at terrible levels, we are constantly told and reminded. Their state of anguish is quite clear for all to see. And it's been quite clear to me, and it used to be clear to members of the Labour Party, that a principal cause of this is what we used to call family breakdown. You won't hear a word mentioned about this by the Labour Party.
To be fair to him, he did say that on his agenda for talking to civil servants will be to get some programme started on mental health and some of those issues.
But they won't attack they won't target the principal causes, which is the breakdown of the key institution that protects children. They talk about the need to protect children, to protect children's mental health. They won't attack or they won't tackle the root causes. So my beef with them is that they are kind of dancing around the issues. I mean, Wes Streeting has, I think to his credit, talked reasonably frankly about the difficulties of the health service. He's not trying to sugar the pill, but they are not coming up with the kind of root and branch thinking that I believe needs to happen when it comes to the health service.
Dorothy, Wes Streeting was, I think he was actually having a go at me when he said commentators who say they haven't got any policies, because pretty regularly after this show, you know, Labour officials complain that I'm a little bit sceptical. Are you hearing anything that makes you feel that the Labour office is taking shape?
Probably talking about toothbrushing was going to bring in a lot of mockery for them. What they really need to tackle is the control that the food industry has over all governments in this country, and that is an underlying cause of the tooth problem. But if you look at
sugar and all of that.
Yes, if you look at what parents say, this may shock the nice middle-class pundits, but in a survey only about a month ago, the biggest thing that parents said they wanted children to be taught in school was life skills. And they said that they wanted that to be taught more than teaching academic subjects for further academic study. And that really shocked me that parents said that. But I
what do
realised
people mean when they say life skills, by the way?
Well, the single biggest thing they said was healthy eating. And that does relate to toothbrushing, actually. And parents can't teach healthy eating because they don't know about healthy eating, so many of them themselves. In Scotland, my country, about 60% of people are overweight or clinically obese. So we actually need schools to be teaching children about healthy eating, and actually cleaning your teeth is part of that. And we know that having unhealthy teeth is a key cause of lack of health. So don't mock it. Although I might not have...
That's my job.
But if I had been the Labour health spokesman, I might not have
David, do you think you're actually onto something?
I think if you're in...
I'm being ticked off for mocking you.
Look, I think if you're in Wes Streeting's position, who is very likely to be Secretary of State for Health very soon, you'd look at public health in this country, the obesity issue, many other issues, oral health amongst children, and you've got to do something about it. Because if we don't do something about it, then we as taxpayers pay for it. And the fact is, life expectancy in big chunks of this country is going down. You know, we are it's happening in the US as well. You know, it's not just this country, but we have to do something about it. And I was really interested last week how Keir Starmer reacted to the Q&A when he was asked about nanny state. He leaned into it. He knew it was coming, and he stuck to his guns.
Yeah, he said, I'm going to take that fight on.
I think the public will react positively to that.
Well, that survey indicates that is how the public think, and that people like you are out of step.
I don't invite you lot to come on and attack me. Melanie.
Well, I think everything you say, Trevor, is always the pearl of wisdom, of course. But, I mean, yes, I mean, I think that, as I say, I don't like the term nanny state, and I think, governments should take cognizance of their responsibilities to promote good and depress the bad. But nevertheless, it's a question of priorities, and I just think that Labour seizes on certain things to kind of dance around the main issues because they don't want to tackle the main issues because they're too difficult.
No, I guess my serious point here was that actually I'm with all the toothbrushing and all of that, but I'm not sure that I'm hearing much that will do anything to get British children up what are called the PISA rankings, the international academic scores. And I'm just wondering if we are, and this possibly might be a journalistic issue as well, whether we are paying enough attention to the things that really matter.
Well, I think the thing that most concerns me at the moment in Britain is the fact that 10% of children now don't go to school. And no, it's more than that, actually. It's gone up from, I think, 10% to 20%. And the thing that came out this week, that there are 35 schools, state secondary schools, where half the children don't go to school. And I'm astonished that is not getting as much attention as it should.
We will return to some of this a little later. Still to come, we'll hear from a former senior spook on what he thinks is the greatest threat posed to the UK right now. Former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, is next.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
I will always remember the atmosphere at the Shanghai protests. It was an electric mix of excitement, fear, and defiance. It's hard to express just how incredibly unusual these scenes are in China. I'm Helen Ann Smith. I'm Sky's Asia correspondent, and I'm based here in Beijing.
A massive COVID wave is sweeping this city, but officially, almost no one has died.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
We found all the roads to one large cluster of facilities were blocked. Those we did reach were fearsome.
My biggest challenge is adequately telling the stories of the Chinese people, even when the authorities would prefer me not to.
Hey. By the rules, we are allowed to film in the streets. I can't tell if I'm moving it or it's moving me, but it's a very strange feeling. Those hills over there, that's Russia.
Is this military ready?
We are prepared to face every kind of challenge.
Welcome back to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. We've entered 2024 facing two major wars and with growing tensions in Yemen and Taiwan. It's easy to feel that there's trouble everywhere you look nowadays. Burrowing beneath the surface in all corners of the globe is this secret intelligence service, better known as MI6. But far from a life of James Bond's death-defying antics, its job is essential, rather prosaic, making the UK safer by stopping terrorism and disrupting the activity of hostile states. It's work that's increasingly put to the test in an ever more dangerous world. I'm joined now by Sir Richard Dearlove, who ran MI6 between 1999 and 2004. And he also now co-hosts a podcast, One Decision, on geopolitics. Good morning, Sir Richard.
Good morning, Trevor.
First of all, I talked to David Cameron this morning about the situation in Yemen, or in the Red Sea, to be precise. Do you think that the action that we in the United States have taken against Houthis can be separated from the conflict in Gaza? Because Cameron was quite adamant about that. They're separate things.
It depends from which perspective you're looking at these events. I mean, the problem is, in the Middle East, in the Arab world, making that separation, particularly on the Arab street, is extremely difficult. But if one's being rational in analysis, I agree with David Cameron that freedom of navigation is a different issue from Gaza, but the Arab street doesn't think that.
But in a sense, in that case, that sort of makes it connected, because whatever we do has an impact.
Inevitably, there's a connection. And it's going to have an impact across the whole area. And I mean, I think what's extraordinary about Gaza is there's a lot of rhetoric coming from the Middle East about the fate of the Palestinians, but actual action to support them is very limited. I mean, the Egyptians don't want to...
You mean by Arab states and the Gulf states?
Yes. But I think the Houthi are, showing in their minds a degree of, sympathy. That's their excuse. But of course, there's quite a complex perspective internationally that lies behind these events.
The attacks that have been mounted by the United States and the UK with support of other states taking place over the last 48 hours. Should we be feeling safer than we did on Thursday?
I don't think it immediately affects our safety. I mean, I think in terms of, let's say, access to the Suez Canal, which, we've seen what the consequences of a blockage of the Suez Canal can be. And that's really important if one takes a wider perspective of national security, security of trade, security of global trade. It's really important. But I mean, if you're talking about sympathetic radicalism and the events in the Middle East now motivating, let's say, domestic terrorism, well, there's a risk there. But I don't think... If you're looking at the Houthis specifically, do they have an infrastructure in the UK, which could be a sort of conspiratorial organisation to mount a terrorist attack? Unlikely. Very unlikely, in my view. But a lone wolf-inspired event, yeah, I mean, it must, to an extent, heighten that. We've seen lone wolf attacks in the UK. Major conspiracies of terrorism, less likely. I think that's the way I would interpret it.
So actually, would that have been a factor in the decision-making, or would this decision to go with the United States on this have been purely a sort of foreign policy issue?
I think it's largely a foreign policy, national security issue. And you take the risk that, it might inspire a lone wolf attack. I think that's accepted.
The Houthis, of course, are saying that it's connected to Gaza. They also say that they are independent actors, independent of Iran. Do you buy that?
No. But I think look, there are three proxy organisations. There's Hezbollah, there's Hamas, there's the Houthi. I think Hezbollah and Hamas are much, much more controlled and closer to Iran. The Houthi, let's say, are two-thirds controlled. But I'm just using that as an example. The Houthi have been a sort of militant, tribal,
troublesome, independent, problematic group historically in Yemen for a very long time. I think
it started essentially as a religious sect, really.
It's a religious sect, but I mean, it's also got tribal origins. I mean, if the Iranians want to stop the Houthis, they certainly have the influence and the power over the Houthis to do that now. So, did they start this? I mean, I would draw a distinction between, their much more direct control of Hamas and Hezbollah. But the Houthi relationship with Iran is incredibly important. And let's face it, the armaments, the training, this all leads back to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which are professionals at fighting arm's-length detached conflict using proxies. That's the way that the Iranians have made their troublesome influence globally felt.
There's one other big power which might have some influence here and for whom this matters. 60% of China's exports to Europe go through the Red Sea and Suez Canal. How do you think Beijing is thinking about how they should react to the disruption of trade? What do you think your sort of opposite numbers are saying to Xi Jinping?
Look, China is a maritime trading nation. It's a global trader. It depends also on security of the high seas. So this is a problem for the Chinese. But I mean, bear in mind the Chinese have, for a significant period of time, been trying to involve themselves in brokering agreements in the Middle East. And in fact, the irony is at the moment that you have the Chinese playing a role, in the fact that Iran and Saudi Arabia have been talking to each other. So, there are dimensions to this conflict which are quite complicated. The two Arab countries most damaged by the threat to the Suez Canal, I mean, the Saudi ports on the Red Sea, that's a problem for them. It's a massive problem for the Egyptian government. The Egyptian government's not going to be getting any income from the Suez Canal. So, I mean, this is a layered and complex problem.
On balance, though, do you agree that we are right to have done what we have done over the last 48 hours?
Absolutely. I don't think that the government has any choice. And I'm rather disappointed to see that both France and Italy had been reluctant to associate themselves with this offensive. And I mean, people are saying, well, the Houthis have sustained attack from the Saudis over a long period of warfare between the two countries. Okay, there's a truce between them now. But I think it's true to say that, the Houthis being attacked by the US Air Force and the RAF is a rather different issue from fighting the Saudis over a long period of time. So I think there'll be, I think they will have got the message very significantly.
Okay. Last question, really. If you were still in your old job, David Cameron said that there are flashing red lights all over the globe, and I guess that they'd be turning to you at the end of one of those long tables in the, that you see in the movies, and saying, "Okay, Sir Richard, it's a year of big elections. We don't know who's going to be in power, and so on. You've done your threat assessment. What are the two big threats that we ought to be paying attention to in 2024?
Well, seen from an intelligence perspective, the two things we need to worry about are obviously Ukraine and what China's long-term behavior globally is going to be, particularly in relation to Taiwan, and how threatening China is to Western interests. But I think it's important, but I'm not a politician, you have to add a political threat, which I'm worried about, which is Trump's re-election, which I think for the UK's national security is problematic, because if Trump, as it were, acts hastily and damages the Atlantic Alliance, that is a big deal for the UK. We've put all our eggs in defence terms in the NATO basket. If Trump really is serious about, as it were, changing the balance. I mean, the American nuclear umbrella for Europe is, in my view, essential to Europe's security and defence.
We will see.
But I mean, that's not an intelligence issue.
No.
This is a political issue.
No,
I was an intelligence officer, not a politician.
Well, you're an intelligence officer, but also an intelligence officer, and so I think we take that serious. I'll tell you what we'll do. As the primary season proceeds, we will come back to you and see whether you see those factors changing. So, Sir Richard, thank you very much indeed for your time.
12 months is a long time in US politics.
Indeed.
Well, it's actually down to 10, isn't it?
It's down to 10. OK. Still to come this morning, Gwyneth Hughes, the screenwriter behind the post office drama that's had the nation gripped and horrified in equal measure on the power of television to tell the most human of stories.
This is about the reputation of the post office. It's not, it's about people's lives, you moron. Finally, 555 of us now, ready to tell our stories.
A drama about IT failures in the post office account system might not at first glance sound like a must-watch. Less still like a programme that will change politics. But Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, the four-part ITV series about one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in UK history, the prosecution of hundreds of innocent postmasters for fraud, has galvanised public outrage and led the British government to announce a new law. The writer of that drama, Gwyneth Hughes, joins me now. Gwyneth, great to see you. And congratulations on the impact of Mr. Bates and the Post Office. Did you foresee this incredible reaction?
Absolutely not. No, we've all been blown away by it. We just, on the day of transmission, our boss sent us all a comforting email warning us that we probably wouldn't do that well, and probably not many people would watch it. But never mind. It will find an audience, which is television speak for nobody's ever going to watch. So we woke up the next morning and he literally thought that he'd misheard the ratings, and it just has got bigger and bigger. And I don't. The whole thing is unbelievable. The story of the postmasters and what happened to them is completely unbelievable from beginning to end. And this is, I think, just an unbelievable chapter in an unfolding, ongoing story.
Why do you think it struck such a chord?
Well, it's an absolutely terrific story, which has been nibbling around the edges of all our minds, hasn't it, for ages? Sort of vaguely heard of it, couldn't quite get to grips with it. It's very complex, very difficult to understand technicalities in it. And once you could get behind those technicalities and show the impact on the lives of the people concerned, I think it just, we pulled out a cork and it all came boiling out. And I think also people are, everybody's fed up, everybody feels they're unheard. Everybody feels, I think, that in some small way in all our lives, this kind of thing is happening. We can't get through, just banal things like dealing with call centres. We've all sat there. We've all done that. And dealing with government.
If I may say so, Gwyneth, I think you're sort of being typically modest about your own skill in translating the story into something watchable. We've worked together, I should make clear. You wrote a great script. I completely failed to get it sold. But you're meticulous in your research, I know. Did you get to talk to all of the people involved, including those who emerged as, let's use the word, villains of the piece?
No, I spoke to no villains. No villains agreed to talk to me. Surprise. I mean, no, nobody at the post office hierarchy wanted to get involved. And, I can't blame them for that, really. Gosh. So, no, we spoke to nobody like that. I have never met Paula Venables. I'd still kill to meet her. But we had to find other ways to try to get inside her head and the heads of the post office bosses because they wouldn't engage. But we did that with Paula Venables. We just went to, we looked at every single email she'd ever written that was disclosed. We looked at all the interviews with her that she'd done with national newspapers, and we spoke to people who'd met her. And we, from that, sort of concocted a characterisation and also the dialogue. All the dialogue in the film that Paula Venables says is from transcripts and things like that, which makes it, it's not spoken English. Our lovely actress, Leah Williams, had to try and find a way to get this emails to come out of her mouth sounding like speech, which she did brilliantly, I think.
In your career, you've basically had two kinds of things that you do. You do, Vanity Fair, Edwin Drood, all of those kinds of things. But also, you've got this line of dramas about things like stalking, honour killings, and now this. One of our panel here today has written a piece today in which he essentially describes what you do as a kind of campaigning journalism. And one of the things that's really interesting and a way a bit humbling, I suppose, for people like me, is that you've managed to achieve what dozens of journalists in print and radio and telly have failed to achieve over 10 to 12 years. What do you think made the difference with this drama in terms of getting people activated, getting government to pay attention?
I think it's not just this drama. I think it's just the power of drama in general as a thing, as a phenomenon that we humans have invented. And we invented it a long time ago for a purpose, which was to make connection. And I think that even the best documentary, and I mean, I was a documentary maker and loved doing that, but even the best of them, they sort of appeal to your head rather than to your heart. because even the best of them, it's always someone sitting there telling you something terrible that happened to them in the past. Whereas in drama, you're right there, during this terrible event, experiencing it through the eyes of the person who went through it. And in the hands of a brilliant actor, that just can grab your heart and grab your attention like nothing else. So I think it's just drama in general. If the right drama comes along with the right subject at the right time, clearly all those things must have come together. The stars aligning, and that's what gave us extraordinary success.
You've obviously, this has been fantastic success. But I know you've obviously got more dragons to slay. What's next?
What's next? It's a prolonged lie down on the sofa. This has been the most extraordinary couple of weeks at the end of the most, hard work, 3 years of work. And I need a rest. But my email box is full. The inbox is full of people saying to me, I've got a story for you. It's even worse than the post office. So, yeah, ice bag on head, darkened room. Then think of something else to do.
OK, we will be watching, but congratulations again, Gwyneth.
Thank you.
OK, in just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel and get their thoughts on why it took a TV drama to get Westminster properly to engage with redressing the injustice of the post office scandal.
When you make a record, there's copyright split in two. There's the publishing, which is almost like the sheet music, and then there's the masters, which is the tapes or whatever they store them on now. And so what happened to Taylor Swift is her first 6 albums she recorded with one record label. That record label then was bought by somebody else, and the contract she had with them meant they owned the master tapes of those first records. And she wasn't terribly pleased about the transfer of ownership. She didn't get a chance, she said, to bid for them herself. So she's decided to re-record the first 6 records, and I think she's 4 into that project. So that she kind of diminishes the values of the early one because there's these new shiny versions to replace them.
And her fans are, such huge fans, the Swifties, that they'll sort of boycott the original one would presume.
Well, I presume they listen to both. Last year she released Midnights, which was like a brand new record, but 1989, the Taylor's version, was one of the best-selling records of the year as well, despite already existing sort of several years hence. So it's from a kind of control point of view, it obviously shows the power that she's gathered in the music industry. But from a commercial point of view, it's working out pretty well as well for her. You're able to say, look, Taylor Swift has got the new contract that Taylor Swift then signed with Universal, her latest record label. She has effectively licensed the record, so that label only owned the records for a set amount of time. Artists like Olivia have been able to go, well, we want the same kind of deal. And obviously, if you're selling lots of records or you've got the potential to sell billions of streams, labels will go, okay, we can do that because we will be able to earn back the money we're going to invest in you quite quickly. I think it's further down the food chain when you get smaller artists where there's a lot of, it's harder for artists to say we want to own the records because the labels are saying, well, we might never make our money back on you. So.
And what's she doing?
Well, she's on BMG, who has a label who have sort of decided to go down this licensing route where, they only own the records for a few times. So they're working with people like Kylie and Sigur Rós and acts like that, where they go, we'll own it for a set amount of time, but ultimately you'll get your record back, which I think from an artist's point of view, it means you've got a longevity of your career, you can do stuff with it. And also you've got control of the records, because one of the big problems is people, as you had with Prince, when he was signed to Warner's and he had a 6-album deal, and he thought he could release 2 albums a year and be out of this deal very quickly, and Warner's were like, well, hang on, we're not going to release an album every 2 albums a year because there's going to be too many records on the market, and that led to his sort of infamous contract dispute with them where he changed his name to the symbol and wrote slave on his face. Yeah, exactly. And so at least with an artist, they feel they're going to get their rights back and they're going to own their records. They then can be a lot more confident going forward that these records, they'll be able to control what happens to them.
Let's have one final chat with our panel, Dorothy, David and Melanie. Dorothy, you've commissioned loads of stuff and you've had your own hits and so on. But why do you think this one had such an impact?
I'm not 100% sure why it's just grasped everybody's imagination so much. But it's not actually a drama, really. It's a drama documentary because everything in it is true.
Oh, Gwyneth was saying, of course, she'd started in doc.
Yeah, so when you're watching it, you're not watching a drama. You're thinking, oh my God, and all this actually happened and these people suffered like that. It was brilliantly written. The acting was fantastic. But also, we're living in a time when we feel so powerless and hopeless with everything that's happening in Gaza and Ukraine and now Yemen. And here was a story where we could grab hold of it and demand action. And we got action. I mean, it's been the most fantastic week off the back of a terrible tragedy because the people of Britain spoke and the government acted. If only people realised we have that power, we're not powerless. And I think it was people's feeling as it became clear, we're getting somewhere here, we can do something.
I thought, David, I mean, you know, you spent a long time running a Red Top and you did a lot of this kind of human interest story and so on. But in a way, there's a sort of implied criticism, I think, here of conventional journalism, because we basically failed. This thing succeeded.
Well, there was a very defensive leader in the Times yesterday that said basically, look, we've been reporting this and the Mail have been reporting it. And yes, you know, Nick Wallace at the BBC, superb podcast series, Computer Weekly, Private Eye, many other people, Daily Mail, business section in particular, have been banging on about this for years. And as Gwyneth has said in other places, if it wasn't for the journalism, then you wouldn't have this piece of drama. So that is true. But I think this was a wonderful populist opportunity for any tabloid editor. You know, it is the essence of populism. It's powerless people who have been had their lives ruined by the elite. That is what populism is. And I just wonder whether part of this is that my successors currently running the big tabloids are obsessed with other things. They're obsessed with the war on woke, they're obsessed with gender issues, they're obsessed with small boats. They're not looking at what ordinary people are really interested in, which is the cost of living, NHS, and things like this. It was right there. You know, the Daily Mail has done a superb job in the sense Ruth Sunderland, who's their business editor, has written a lot about this, but they only splashed with it once until last week. They could have put it on the front page, every day for two weeks and done what ITV have done, but they didn't.
Melanie, what do you reckon?
Well, I think what David says is correct. The Mail continues to lead public opinion as well as reflect it, and it didn't give it the big treatment. But I think also, as has been said, drama has the power to touch emotion in a way that journalism doesn't. What drama gives us is a clear black and white hero and villain. And in a way that sort of satisfies people. But the final thing I would say is that I think, unfortunately, and this bears upon your implication in your broadening this out to the media generally, I think people no longer believe or take notice of what the media, the mainstream media, are saying at all. I think they discount it as flam, as hype, as stuff that is untrue, that is biased. And I think they are getting information from all sorts of other sources. And so in that vacuum, a drama documentary has the power to move people and to anger, which has a direct impact upon politicians who are listening carefully to what people are saying in a way that perhaps newspapers no longer have.
I was away when it dropped, but the thing that struck me is actually the story is rather... It feels like you're all younger than me, but it feels like a rather old-fashioned story. I'm thinking Passport to Pimlico, a sort of Ealing about the little man and woman whose names nobody knows and so on. And it feels to have that kind of quality. It's a very British story, don't you think?
Yeah, and maybe one of the reasons journalists didn't, it's not that journalists didn't cover it, it's more, as you say, that editors didn't go really huge on it, was maybe that they weren't glamorous people, but actually that's what has most affected us as viewers, that they are these very unglamorous people like us. Obviously not like you, Trevor, because you're really glamorous.
I'm very ordinary.
Right, yeah. But that we all know a sub-postmaster, and it felt like we also in this week that we have been one Britain, that we've all been united, and that we've discovered that we on some things we do all think the same way, although we're always told that we don't.
Dorothy, David, Melanie, thank you very much for an entertaining morning. That is it from us for this Sunday's show. I'll be back next week, believe it or not. Politics Hub with Sophie Ridge is on Sky News tomorrow and every night, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m. And they are in a brand new studio here in the heart of Westminster. Thank you for joining us this week. See you again next week.